So tonight's objection is kind of an interesting one. It's called the one God further objection. One God further. Okay, so it goes like this. Everyone is an atheist pertaining to some gods. You are an atheist when considering Mormons or Muhammad or even Buddha. Well, I just take it one God further and deny his existence too. How many of us have heard this? Anybody? Maybe a few. I certainly have. Wow. You guys haven't heard this before. Get out in the world a little bit more, because this is everywhere. Okay? This is actually perpetrated by a lot of college campuses. Lenore Ryan, actually, there's a couple of professors that will actually use this as one of their arguments. And it goes like that. It says, everyone's an atheist pertaining to some God. You are an atheist when considering Mormons, right? You don't believe in Elohim, right? You're an atheist when it pertains to Buddha. You're an atheist when it pertains to Muhammad. I, as an atheist, just takes it one more God than you do. And I eliminate all of them. Okay? Let me just interrupt that discussion really quick and just point out the fact that, for one, it doesn't make any sense when you think about it. The actual argument doesn't follow. Why doesn't it follow? Because there are two definitions of what an atheist is. There is positive atheism and there is negative atheism. Positive atheism teaches that I affirm that God does not exist for X, Y, and Z, right? Making light of God and his omnipotence or his omnibenevolence, meaning his all-goodness, in light of evil, right? So that is an argument or an objection in support of there not being a God, okay? A negative atheist is somebody who will in fact say, I just lack belief, bro. You just take life one day at a time. And they don't typically have a whole lot to offer in the way of the discussion because their position is, I just lack belief. Okay, so either definition, both definitions conclude that there is no God. So the argument doesn't even get off the ground when you say, I'm an atheist in all these other gods, I just take it one God further. What we mean by atheist is that you don't believe in any God. That's the point of it. Okay? Are you with me so far? Okay. All right. However, I'm going to grant that premise as though they actually have a valid argument to begin with, and they just didn't pull that off the internet, right? And to be catchy, all right, and trendy. I'm going to actually give them the benefit of the doubt and try to give some legitimacy to their objection, okay? At the heart of the objection, what the question is there a difference between none, or one? That's at the heart of the argument. I know it's late, but just listen to me. That's at the heart of the argument. Is there a difference between one God or no gods? Okay? That is their position, is that they're like, no, there's not a big difference between the two. You just one less God. Okay? So for them, it's not a big difference between those two, between none and one God. Okay? Are you with me? You're with me. Hello, people. All right, good deal. Well, if I said judge, I only killed one person. Because in light of all the millions of others out there, I just took it one less further. It's not really a big deal. It's just one. In such context, there's a difference. Right? Does that make sense? If you don't understand it, because you're checking out on me. The atheist in the objection is when he says, everyone is an atheist pertaining to some gods. You're an atheist when considering Mormonism, Buddhism, or Muhammad. I just take it one God further. His main objection is there's not a big difference between 1 and 0. Okay, that's his position. It's not hard, just give up one more God. Right? I'm saying, well, it's not hard, I can just kill one person out of billions of people. It doesn't matter. No, one matters, right? That's a big deal. One is something. Okay. In similar fashion, if I use that same kind of reasoning, I said, well, sir, ma'am, you're illiterate to every language, such as Spanish, Greek, Egyptian. You can't speak any of those languages. Let's just eliminate one more language. Just go to English so you can't talk. That's a big deal. right? Like, for somebody to be mute, like, hello, I don't want to not be able to talk. It's a big deal between none and zero, right? So pointing that out to the atheist goes a long way. It's pointing out, look, you're acting like it's just one God we just get rid of. No, it is a big deal, because you may very well be giving more away than what you're willing to give away. Does that make sense? Because with the excursion or with the elimination of that one God, you're also throwing out all of the other things, like morality, for example. Okay, moving on. Everyone is an atheist pertaining to some gods. You're an atheist when considering Mormonism, Muhammad, and or Buddha. I just take it one God further. Okay, now regarding the actual argument itself, listen up. I personally think that dumb people exist. I think smart people exist. And I think there are some people that are smart that think they're dumb. And I think that some are dumb and think they're smart. But there are smart people who think they're dumb, and some that are dumb that are actually smart. And some who wish to be smart but are actually dumb. And some that are dumb that wish and say that they're smart. But at the end, I think there's some that are wishing and wanting, but some that are smart and dumb. Some are also smart, and very dumb. So I think, how do we find out which is which? How do you know who is smart and who is dumb? You give them a test. That's how you find out if you're smart or you're dumb. Right? Okay. So, how are you going to determine if the God of the Bible or the God of Christianity is a tenable worldview, is a viable worldview, is a worldview in which makes sense? You give it a test. How do you make light of Muhammad and Buddha and Christianity and all these other worldviews that are stacked up against each other? How do you distinguish which one should we listen to? You give it a test. I'm not just going to take the word of somebody that says, oh, I'm smart. I've got the right answers, everybody. I'm the one that's enlightened. No, you give a universal test that account for all of the things and standards that you set forth in motion. Make sense? What are some of those things look like, though? What does the test look like to overcome this particular objection? Number one, it needs to address morality. It does. Are we just goo to the zoo to you and evolve pond scum and we just evolve to be whatever we are? Is torturing babies for fun sometimes okay, but in other contexts it's not okay? Is rape sometimes okay? Because if we just evolved and it's just about the big strong man and he, 6'5" man, and he's evolved to have the best seed, well, doesn't it make sense that it would justify him raping all these women and moving his seed throughout the generations? That would follow, right? Because if we're just evolved, why not? There's no such thing as rape or morality or incest or any other types of evils, because it's all subjective. We're just goo to the zoo to you. So any tenable, viable worldview needs to answer the questions of morality, number one. Number two, it needs to answer the question of the human condition. What do I mean by that? The human condition is, why do I feel distance from God? Why do I feel distance from others? And why is there innate feeling within myself of why I feel at odds, even with myself? In short, it needs to answer the questions of sin. Any tenable worldview, that is. It must address the issues of cosmology, or where we come from, right? It needs to account for time, space, and matter. If you have time and you have space and you have matter, well, if you have matter and you have time but you have no space, where would you put it? Right? You with me? If you've got matter and you got time but no space, where would you put it? Make sense? Right? If you have space and you have matter but no time, when would you put it? So cosmology deals with, where does everything come from? Because wherever we come from, you had to have time, space, and matter in existence from the very beginning. It needs to answer that question. It must also answer the questions of life after death. What happens when you die? Right? Because any tenable, any worldview worth believing, if you're just goo to the zoo to you and a cosmic miscarriage and a wet fart in the universe, then your body is going to decay and you're going to become worm food. That's not a very good answer to that question, but it's an answer. But stacked up against Christianity, where Christianity says there will be things like justice, meaning Hitler will actually have a punishment, not just him shooting himself in the head and getting away with everything he did, right? The scales will be balanced. There's judgment. There's things, life after death, that we look forward to. There's an almighty God that you'll stare in the face. That question of life after death, it's an important question. Where do we go? What happens? What does it look like? Any worldview worth believing, that's at one of the roots of it. It also needs to address design, right? Design. Inanimate objects like rocks and stars and moons, they all have a purpose. They all have laws governing their fine-tuning and making, in which case, that they have a start and a finish. There's a purpose to them, right? And so any tenable worldview needs to answer that question. But here's what that objection does. I'm an atheist of all other gods. You're an atheist of all other gods, like Thor, Thanos, Zeus, Artemis, Muhammad, Buddha. I just take it one God further. It honestly is said, in my opinion, from a disingenuous person, because if they actually gave Christianity a hard look and they see the overwhelming evidence for the things of God, they, more often than not, will concede if they're an open-minded person, and they look inward, no pun intended. And they're willing to look at all of these things like morality, origin, purpose, life after death, design, all of these things. Which worldview, out of all the ones listed, actually give the best explanation for these things? So there is a big difference between one and none. And I suggest, Miss Sir or Ma'am, or atheist making this objection, how about you do yourself a service and stop giving yourself a disservice and actually look at the brute evidence of the worldview of Christianity and how all of these things are answered and all of these things are accounted for in the worldview of Christianity. Because Mormonism can't. It's bankrupt. Polytheism and the notion that there's trillions of gods doesn't account for origin, doesn't account for sin, mind you. Because to them, you have three kingdoms. There is no judgment. Everyone goes to heaven. There is no sin or judgment within the Mormon church, except for those that walk away from Mormonism. That's the only time that you actually, in fact, go to hell. Seriously, that's not a joke. Very convenient. So the point is that when that objection is given, it's typically given from those that are disingenuous and who are unwilling to look at the brute evidence of the worldview of Christianity. But in light of that objection, it's very easy to just point that out to them and say, hey, that's a very disingenuous question. Have you actually looked at Christianity? Have you looked at the reasons for the faith? Because had you done so, you would just be making this bold assertion that there's not a big difference between none and one. Make sense?